We're back on the second episode of the second half of Chapter 8. This is actually the 10th overall episode, and I think I'll use that numerical standard because you'll see the episodes are named. 1 is the very first one. We just did number 9, which is the first one on trimming. And then this one is the second one on trimming, where we define trimming. This is episode number 10 overall. So, what is trimming? We all instinctively know that trimming usually implies that something, whatever I'm trimming, is always getting smaller. However, in the editing world, the word trimming can have a couple of different meanings. When I say, hey, I need you to trim this sequence clip, that can mean that the sequence clip is going to get smaller. That means with fewer frames. But it could also mean that the sequence clip is going to get longer in duration, in which it'll have more frames. Now, as I said, when you trim a clip, you're either adding frames of video to a clip or subtracting frames of video from a clip, okay? As you know, a video clip is made up of a series of still frames played in rapid succession, one after the other. Because each frame of video is slightly different from the preceding frame of video, when you play all of the recorded frames of video at a rapid speed, like say 24 frames per second, an illusion of motion is created. So instead of seeing the individual still frames, the frames tend to blend together, giving you the impression of fluid motion. So if you've ever made a flipbook animation or even a traditional straight ahead animation, this is a concept I'm sure you're very familiar with. The idea is a tendency of your eyes to blend multiple still images together, resulting in what looks like natural fluid motion when the still images are played back in front of your eyes at a rapid pace. That's called the persistence of vision. Say, for example, I'm shooting with a camera and my frame rate is 24 frames per second. That video camera is actually a still image camera that's taking 24 still images every second. Now, every still image it takes is slightly different from the previous still image. That is, if something in front of the camera is actually moving. And so each still image has that moving object in a slightly different position. So I have a whole bunch of still images of a moving object in a slightly different position. Say I take 1 second of video, 24 frames, 24 still images. When I show you those 24 still images at the same frame rate at which I shot it, it will look like fluid, natural motion as I observed it on the set or where I was when I actually shot the video footage. When you trim a sequence clip, you can add frames to the head of the sequence clip, or you can add frames to the tail of the sequence clip. This would mean that the sequence clip is going to get longer. And what I'll do is I will kind of give you a demo of that right now. Go to my timeline and let's just use a selection tool. And let's just isolate one of these clips. This one on the end here. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this cross dissolve at the end by selecting it and pressing delete. And I'm going to use my selection tool, or what's called the regular trim. I set up the regular trim by simply clicking the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I know I have the selection tool selected because of the fact that I have a red bracket icon. Both the icon, see it looks like a red bracket with a arrow, and I can tell you the head of this clip is selected because I have a red bracket over it. All right. Another thing I want to show you is that it's like we have the head and tail of a clip. The center of the clip is either called the center or the body of the clip. That's going to become important a little later on when we talk about slip editing. We'll talk about that later. But the idea is, you know that you are at the head of a clip because if you look at that icon for the regular trim, the arrow is pointing to the right. Anytime you have a clip selected, head or tail, with any editing tool, the arrow will always point towards the center or the body of the clip. So you know, okay, I have the head selected because the bracket is to the left on the clip, and the arrow is pointing to the right. Whereas when I select the tail, I know I'm at the tail, and I see the arrow for the regular trim pointing towards the center of the clip. I can tell you how long this single sequence clip is. I can select it and press the keyboard shortcut X. X marks the spot, just like Pirates and Treasure. X marks the clip with sequence clips in the timeline. So what that means is that when I say I mark the clip, that means it's going to give me an in point on the first frame of the sequence clip, and it's going to give me an out point on the last frame of the sequence clip. So when I mark the clip, I can look in the lower right-hand corner of a program monitor, and the numbers in white, in this case it's 3 seconds and 17 frames. That's the duration of time between my in point and my out point. So this whole clip is 3 seconds and 17 frames long. I can press Option X to get rid of my marks, my in point, my out point. So X marks the spot, X marks the clip, and Option X gets rid of my in points and out points, or it's the same thing as clearing your in points and out points. In any case, going from right to left is going in a negative direction, going from left to right is going in a positive direction. This is the head of the clip, this is the tail of the clip. So say, for example, your director you're working with says, hey, I need this clip that we're looking at here to be longer. The first question you need to ask your director is, do you need it to be longer from the head? Meaning that, do you want me to add frames to the head of the clip? Or do you need it to be longer from at the tail of the clip? That means, do I need to add frames at the tail of the clip? Okay, now you may say, well, what's that all about? Well, I'm gonna do what's called a match frame. I'm gonna move the playhead right over the clip, select the clip, press F for frame, and it'll bring up that source clip again in my source monitor, just like it was before I edited it into the timeline. And I'll see I have my points, my in point and my out point, that represent how much of that clip is in the timeline, how much of that clip is a sequence clip, how much of the source clip is a sequence clip. Now, as you can see, before the in point, I've got lots of footage that I did not use. After my out point, I've got lots of footage that I did not use, okay? The footage before the in point is called head material because it's before the head of the source clip. The footage after the out point in the source monitor is called tail material because it is footage after the out point. So essentially, if they tell you, well, which direction I want to edit at the head, and they also tell you, well, I want you to edit it in a negative direction. Negative direction is going from right to left. So that basically means I want you to pull this head of this clip out this way. And I just kind of showed you how to make a trim. One way to make a trim is to select any trim tool. In this case, we use the regular trim tool or the selection tool. And I clicked and dragged negatively at the head of the clip. So he's told you, your record's told you, hey, I want you to make a trim at the head of the clip. I want you to trim in a negative direction. I can look and see that as you trim negatively, you have lots of head material here that I can add to the sequence clip. So it'll make it longer at the head. But then of course, the director needs to tell you how much head material to add. How much, okay? So the director will say, using incomplete sentences, I want you to regularly trim negative 10 frames at the head of this sequence clip. Okay, so he told you, you're gonna trim from the head. You know the direction that the head is going or the edit point is going, because the head is the edit point as well. And he says negative 10 frames. So right about there, if you see my tooltip there, right about there, let me zoom in and then go back to what your director wants. Right about there is what the director wants, okay? And you can see when I add negative 10 frames by regular trimming negatively at the head of the sequence clip by 10 frames, the new duration of the sequence clip will be 4 seconds and 6 frames. Pow, just like that. So it's longer and you'll be able to see, I'll show it to you. This is what it looks like after the trim. Notice really carefully where you see the rollers. Okay, and this is what it looked like before you made the trim. See, it got smaller. This is before you made the trim. Okay, so this is before. And after, okay? So I regular trimmed negative 10 frames at the head of a clip, all right? So that made the clip longer. What if the director said, hey, I messed up. I wanted you to regular trim positive 20 frames at the head of this clip. Well, I'm gonna do the same thing, except for I'm gonna go in a positive direction to the right. So let's say it's at 20 frames, right around there. So I did a 20 frame regular trim, positive 20 frame regular trim at the head of the sequence clip. And as you can see, it got shorter. This is what it looked like before. Notice the position of the guys in the boat. And this is what it looks like after. Notice the position of the guys in the boat. We cut into this shot a little later on. Okay, so as you can see, you may say, wow, my mind is blown. I would have thought if I'm trimming, the clip is always getting smaller, which is not always the case. And I would have thought that if I was trimming in a negative direction, wow, that sounds like something's going to get shorter. But once again, that's not always the case, because when I trim negatively at the head of a clip, it gets longer. When I trim positively at the head of a clip, it gets shorter, okay? Because when I trimmed positive 15 or 20 or however many frames at the head of this clip, that clip got shorter. Same thing with the tail. When I trim positive 20 frames at the tail of the clip gets longer. When I regular trim negative, let's say, this is 1 second and 1 second and 6 frames. So I think our frame rate here is 24 frames per second. So that 1 second is the same thing as 24 frames. And let's add 6 frames to that to give us 30 frames total. So I basically regular trimmed a negative 30 frames at the tail of this sequence clip. Bam. And as you can see, it got shorter. Okay. So to determine whether the clip is getting longer or shorter, you have to know whether you are trimming at the head or the tail, and you have to know what direction you're trimming in. Are you trimming negatively or are you trimming positively? Okay, if you trim negatively at the head of a clip, it's going to get longer. If you trim positively at the head of a clip, it's going to get shorter. If you trim positively at the tail of a clip, it's going to get longer. And if you trim negatively at the tail of a clip, it's going to get shorter. Okay, so as you can see, when I trim, I'm either adding frames of video to a clip or subtracting frames of video from a clip. So that's it. That's it for just a basic definition of trimming. Next, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in episode 12. We're going to talk about the different types of trimming operations. And just to give you a little preview, you can access all of the different types of trims from the toolbar. That's one way to do it. And the different types of trims are a regular trim. Sometimes they'll call these different trims edits instead of trims. So regular trim or regular edit, a ripple trim or ripple edit, a roll trim or roll edit, a slip trim or slip edit, and a slide trim or slide edit. And that's what we're going to talk about in episode number 12. See you there.